Good evening, everyone. Today we are going to discuss very important concepts and scenarios that are very useful for database team. Okay, not only database team. If you want to protect, if you want to keep secure the data, we must know these key points. Okay, as a DBA, we have to understand if you provide the permission, what will happen? If you revoke the permission, what will happen? All the people require this kind of access or any limited access. We need to understand because management and the business, they are not much aware. But this will ask for the access. But before providing the access, as a DBA, we need to ask some questions based upon the requirement, based upon their need and approvals. We have to provide the required permissions to access the data, because database team, the main thing is like maintain the data and provide the high availability with the data accuracy, and the same thing we have to provide our security data, because the someone should be not to log in and they should not get the data from the server. So for that, we need to follow the certain rules before providing the access. Okay, so before going to the topic, we need to understand two keywords. Okay, what are those keywords? Those keywords are authentication and authorization. Okay, it's a very two common words, regular base we are using, but these are the for the first step for the security. Okay, we need to understand these two keywords. Those are authentication and authorization. Okay, so if you want to protect, if you want to give the access, if you want to give only limited access, if you want to give the full control, so we need to must understand these two keywords. So here authentication, authorization, very important for the DB team, not only DB team, for all the employees. So here, what is the authentication? The authentication means whenever you log into the server, first it will validate what are the values are entering before getting into the server, to checking the username and password correct or not. Those things comes into the authentication. Suppose if you are entering the building, in the building itself, in the ground floor, security team will ask, can you show me your ID card? Well, once you show the ID card, they will allow the building. The same thing in the SQL server or any environment. Suppose if you want to log into the Google Gmail ID, what we are going to do? We are going to enter the username and password. If username and password is correct, then we can log into the Gmail. So here the first step is it will verify the username is correct or password is correct. If the both are correct, then we'll allow to get into the server. If any one of the fail, it won't allow. So authentication is means to checking the username and password valid or not. That is the authentication. What is the authorization? So once we log into the server, what are the resources we are going to access? Suppose you are going to the entering to the building. Initially, we will show your ID card. Your ID card is valid. You can log into the, you can entering into the server. Once we entering into the server, we have multiple rooms or multiple apartments. In that multiple apartments, which apartment you want to access, which apartment you are going to use. So take an example, you want to enter into the IT company. Okay, in the IT company, first they will ask your ID card. If your ID card is passed, will show the ID card to the security person. That is the first step. Once you log into the building, in that ID card will allow only for specific rooms. That won't allow HR rooms. That won't allow our data center rooms. That will allow that won't allow the other secure rooms. That will allow only what are the permission we have given. Like you can log into you can enter the building. Just you can go. Will sit into some specific room. You can able to access a cafeteria. You can able to access some other areas like a washroom and some other things. That means once you enter into the building, what are the rooms? What are the specific objects you can able to access? Those it will tell authorization. Authorization means kind of like which one you need access, you want to utilize. Those will tell authorization. So the two things is authentication, authorization. The authentication means simply validating your credentials. Authorization, it will tell what are the resource you need access and you are going to access. So here go for definition. Process of verifying who you are, like entering username and password. Authentication. So authentication, we can convert the SQL server. So let me go for the SQL server. Yeah, authentication. So suppose here you are logging into the server. This is the SQL server. Okay. So you want to log into the server. First, what we will do? Go for database engine. Then it is showing authentication. Okay. Authentication here we have two types of authentication in the SQL server. Windows authentication, SQL authentication. So Windows authentication means while logging into the server, no need to enter the password and username. The username already it will display. Why? Because while entering into the system, while entering into the computer, we are logging into the our virtual machine or computer using this account. So that means our Windows accounts. That our Windows accounts are created or managed from the Active Directory. In the Active Directory, the users will create and the users password will manage the from the Active Directory. Okay, using that user name and password, once we can log into the computer. Once we log into the computer, while connecting the connect, here by default it will take our username and password. In the Windows authentication, we no need to enter the username and password, but all Windows user cannot log into the SQL server. Why? Because they are simply created in the Active Directory, but they did not map to the SQL server. So here database team, what we will do, we will map our login to the SQL server. Then only they can able to log in. Suppose this is the computer. If you go for these properties, so this is the computer. Okay, this computer not only database team and this computer can able to RDP, remote desktop procedure. Like this computer can be able to access multiple people. Okay, this multiple people, how they will access? They will access from their Active Directory accounts. What are the accounts are given permission to the computer? They cannot log in. Here, database team, we need to map those Windows accounts in the SQL server. Then only they can able to log into the SQL server. The key bullet point is what are the Windows login are given to the virtual computer or computer node or virtual machine node, they cannot log in. Those Windows logins we need to map or create the in SQL server. Then only they can able to log into the SQL server. So here if I go for database engine, if they want to try to access, okay, so I have access to the virtual computer. I have access to this computer. So once I log into the computer, and if I go for SSMS, then once I open the SSMS, I try to connect the SQL server. So here, if I try to connect the SQL server, what it will do? It will check this user and have the permission or not. Why? Because these accounts we need to add to the SQL server. How we need to add? Come to the logins, go to the new login. So here we need to add Windows authentication. So as I mentioned here, this computer having multiple people. In this multiple people who need the access. Okay. So what we need to do? Come to here. We need to give that particular Windows account. Then only they can able to log into the server. That is Windows authentication. Windows means like the user created from the active directory. That user called Windows user. So while accessing the SQL server via Windows user, that authentication falls under the Windows authentication. Okay, one more authentication is SQL authentication. What is the SQL authentication? The SQL authentication means database team will create the logins under the SQL server and they will provide the username and password to get into this particular SQL instance, this particular database server to get into our instance. Okay, so here go to logins, new login. Here the option is called SQL authentication. SQL authentication means the DB team are who are having the full control that missions they can able to create the SQL users. So the SQL user means the user can be created under the SQL server and providing the passwords and managing the passwords and managing the permission under the SQL server. Those called SQL authentication. So authentication, we have two authentications, Windows authentication and SQL authentication. So, and here we have one more modes. Okay, don't confuse authentication and modes. So while installing the SQL server, in the SQL server installation phase, we will come there like what type of authentication modes we require. Like I mentioned, go for mixed mode. There, while installing the software, while installing the SQL server and the computer in the installation phase, will come the one page. It will ask which type of authentication we require. There are two authentication modes. Those are Windows authentication mode and other one is mixed authentication mode. So once we install, we can see that option in the SQL server instance properties. If you go instance, right click properties, and if you go for security, I'm recording. Recording. See here, instance properties, then go to security. While installing the SQL server, I selected SQL server and Windows authentication mode. Okay, what is that mode? If you select SQL Server and Windows authentication means that authentication mode we can call like mixed. Mixed means the SQL Server allow the users, Windows user and as well as SQL users to connect the our instance. That authentication mode we can call like a mixed mode. What is the Windows authentication mode? Windows authentication modes which will allow the users, it will allow the accounts to connect the SQL server only the user which are created from the active directory. Those users can only allow. That means it won't allow the users which are created under SQL server. So we need to understand the interview which question they're asking. What is your authentication? Can you give me the authentication types? What we can tell? We can tell authentication modes are two types. Those are Windows mode and mixed mode. And we can give the explanation and you have to explain and what is the authentication. The authentication is a validation the username and credential. In the authentication, we have two authentication types. Those are Windows authentication and SQL authentication. We have to explain. And while explaining the interview, no need to give all the theory. Just give the one bullet point and you have to ask them, can I explain more? Then only you have to explain more. Otherwise, you have to give simple answer. Authentication modes are two modes, Windows authentication mode and mixed mode. And coming to the authentication, we have two authentication, Windows authentication and SQL authentication. And you have to give answer. Windows authentication means the users are created from the Active Directory. SQL authentication means the users and logins are created from the SQL server. That's it. If they ask more explanation, you have to tell. The Windows users will create from the infra team. We don't have access to create the users, Windows users from the Active Directory. So the Active Directory users will create from the infra team. Once they created the users, those Windows users or Windows accounts, we can map to the SQL server. So don't confuse here. Are you able to create the Windows users? Yes, we can create the Windows users like mapping to the that users in the SQL server. But realistically, practically, the Windows users infra team will create in the Active Directory. Once they created those users, we can map it from the SQL server. So you have understand what is authentication, what is authorization, and what is mixed mode, and what is Windows mode. These are the very important to understand the things. So here, what will happen in any secure, any banking sector, while installing the SQL server, always they will create the Windows mode. Why? Because if you create the Windows authentication mode, the users which are we going to map, those users can able to access. Why? Because each and every user having one username and password. But if you go here, SQL server, I can create the user and password. If you know the username and password, you can connect the server without logging into the computer. You can connect. Okay. So compared to the SQL user, Windows user secure. So that is the reason each and every banking sector and security projects, all the users, all the logins will create as a Windows user and all the SQL server installation will select as a Windows mode. So this is the Windows authentication. What I meant to say, this is for authentication and authorization, and authentication mode topic. Let me here. Come on, it's very slow. Here, authentication, authorization, AU, PH, authorization. You have monitored authentication and authorization, and go for. So here, security. While installing the SQL server, if you select Windows authentication, it won't allow the SQL server. So let me here after topic, end of the session, I will show you like how to now how to create the users, how to map, and we can change this information. We can see the difference. So today we can create only SQL users. Uh, uh, I'm not going to create the Windows user. Why? Because right now I have this mission as a work group missions. This is not connected through the network. This is computer not able to communicate the other missions. We don't have, like I don't have any active directory for now. For other coming to the other topics, while configuring the log shipping and mirroring and replication, what I can do, I can create a lab environment like a one active directory server and other computers, and I can go for like a communication between all the computers. That time we can create a Windows user and we can access. For now, I can create only SQL users. So this is for the authentication and authorization. So before moving to the next topic, do you have any doubts? Okay, let me move to the next topic. So here we need to what do you mean to say? Once we install the SQL server, once we install the software, okay. So what are the default logins will come? Okay. So once we we have a software, we are installed like an instance like a neighbor instance or a default instance. What are the instance we install? After installation, what are the default logins? Okay. So the login means like a entity. Entity means what are the resource you are going to ask access. So the login means like suppose you're logging into the Gmail, entering the username and password, we can call like a account or we can call like a login. So like that here, once we install the SQL server, there are few logins default will come to the SQL server, and those logins will have sysadmin access, and few logins uh, don't have sysadmin access, and sysadmin access means full control. Like once we install the SQL server, few accounts will create automatically with full control on the server, and few logins will have limited access. So what are those? So here I mentioned account. The account we can call login or user. So I will explain what is the login and what is the user. Very, very important. Uh, in the middle of the class, we will understand what is the login and what is the user. So here, default logins. The logins means kind of a server level entity. Server level means instance level, entire environment. That logins will come. So those logins where we can see. So if you go to the SQL Server instance, then if you go to the security, then if you go for logins, okay. So login is the entity in the server level. That is request access for the in the SQL Server. If you go to logins, we can see several logins are there. Okay, in that, what are the default logins? So in the previous interviews, they used to ask what are the default logins, what are the permissions they will comes, and what is the purpose of those default logins. Nowadays interviews they are not asking, but as a DPA we need to understand all these areas. Without understanding this area, we cannot maintain the security. And sometimes, like if you want to configure any availability or if you want to take any backups, those scenario we need to understand why this account required this kind of permissions. So I'm going to the default logins. Okay, so let me go for principal. So principal is anyone or anything that can request it to the SQL Server. Okay, so we have two types of principal. One is server level principal, another one is database level principal. So right now I'm explaining server level principal. Server level principal is login. So what are the default logins? Yeah. So here we have a few logins. One is SA. So if you install the SQL Server, in the install page, we can see right Windows mode and the mixed mode. While selecting the mixed mode, we are entering the only password, not for the username. So that time the user, it will take by default SA, that is sysadmin login. That will have full control to the that particular software or the particular instance. So SA will come while installing the SQL Server if you selected the mixed authentication mode. So we no need to give the username and we have to provide the password. Why? Because by default it will take the SA username. If you go for Windows authentication mode, the SA will be there, but that SA will be disabled. So from security concerns, like we can tell disable the SA account. So some organizations they will tell disable the SA account. Why? Because SA is the full control on the server. If you know the user password, the person will log into the server. They can able to perform all the activities on the SQL Server. So that is a reason most of the secure projects and some other projects, what they will tell, disable the SA account. This is the default login in the server level. Second, Windows admin or current user. So while installing the SQL Server, if you select Windows mode or mixed mode, in the bottom of the page, it will ask add current user. Add current user means what are the person is going to install the SQL Server. That person account will add automatically to the inside the SQL Server, and that person will get the full control. After that, we can ask there one more radio button called like it will ask add the another account. And if you go and add another account, generally what we will do, we will add the DBA group or any other common group to get the access. So if you select only current user, only the user which is installing that person only can add automatically, you will get the sysadmin. If you select add one more user, those users also will get by default sysadmin, and those users will get the full control. So while installing the SQL server, we can recommend add current user and as well as add the your DBA group, or maybe who are managing those server, those group we must add. Why? Because you install the SQL server, next day you took the sick leave or emergency leave, but next day the project is going to go for onboarding, so someone has to log in, right? If you add that project people while installing the SQL server by clicking the add group, so that they can able to, by default they will add and they will get the sysadmin access. So the number count is 2. The thing is like, while explaining the interview, don't give any numbers. Not only this topic, all the topics, we should not give any count. Just give the words and explanation. The other thing is like the number 3. So here the number 3 is like, while installing the SQL server, after giving the Windows mode, we will get one page. In that, it will ask like a database engine and SQL Server browser and as well as SQL Server agent. In that, it will ask what these services, which account you want to run it. So if you select a local account or NT authority, that time those logins will automatically valid to the SQL Server and will get the full control. Suppose while installing the SQL Server, those database engine or SQL Server agent, if you give the services run under as Active Directory username and password. If you give Active Directory username and passwords, those accounts also will add by default and they will get sysadmin. So this, see here, the service accounts. Suppose like if we go for services.msc. So SQL Server. While installing, I gave the this SQL Server service account run under NT services. If I give the NT services, that login by default automatically added to the SQL Server and it will give the sysadmin. So what is the purpose of this account? Why you need to add? So why? Because this is the SQL Server. It has to communicate the network and it has to get some resource to this computer. That is the reason this account add to the SQL Server and it will get the full control. So here it helps SQL talk to the other servers on the network. So here, what is the purpose of? Yeah, this is a full control Windows account to perform the administrative activities. If you go for 4, four or 5, say, okay. If you go for NT services, what? NT authority. Yeah. So NT authority, it will, if you select while installing the SQL Server, if you give database engine, local account or Windows account, irrespective of the accounts, the NT authority account system will be added to the SQL Server. So here this NT services, it will add based upon our service account we are giving. Coming to the NT authority system, irrespective of the database engine, if you are giving Windows account or local account or NT services, this account by default it will create under the SQL server. So why? Because it has to interact with our operating system and some other purpose. Okay, and this anti-authority system just it will create the login. By default, it won't get access. It will get only public access. But what we will do, once we install the SQL server, we can give sysadmin. Why? Because we will explain in the later topics. If you want to configure the always availability, if you want to take some backups and some other things, we need to give the sysadmin. Why? Because it has to interact the operating system. Once we install the SQL server, this SQL server has to interact the operating system and some other components using this NT authority. Okay, by default, it will get only public access. It won't get sysadmin access. I think I gave sysadmin, but you can go and check. You can install the SQL server. You can check it. By default, if we go to server level roles, we won't get any access except public. So in the real time, what we are going to do, we will give the sysadmin up to our requirement. Then if you go for another login, so NT service. So NT, yeah. So in the while installing the SQL server, what I mentioned, for database engine agent, we are selecting right by default database engine SQL server agent will comes. In the after we can see the like which account we need to run right. So database engine related one account will create as a system full access, and the same thing we will get the SQL server agent account. It will create under the SQL server. Why? Because it has to schedule the backups, it has to send the alerts, and it has to perform the automation accounts in the SQL server. So this is the related to SQL server agent. So while installing the SQL server agent services, we can see enterprise edition, standard edition, web edition, evaluation edition, and developer edition, not for the express edition. So while installing the SQL server, we can see database engine SQL server agent. So those related services, two accounts by default it will create, and it will get the full control. So here this is my database engine service account. If we go here, properties, it will come by default full control. If you go for server, sysadmin. By default, it will get sysadmin. If you don't have sysadmin, few other activities it will fail. So we need to provide full control on the SQL server database engine logon service account. So here one more thing is like, while installing the SQL server, okay, you give that by default run as a login as a NT services. After some time, okay, after some time, 2 months or 3 months, what you did, you changed that particular login as a service account. So I selected as a come here. I selected as a Active Directory user. I have given the user which was created on the Active Directory. If I change this particular service account, username and password, what will happen? Those accounts by default it won't add. We need to create under SQL server, and we need to provide. Those are not default logins. but we need to mention, we need to create, otherwise some other functionalities fail. But interview asks, what are the default logins? We have to explain these things. Go for here. Default logins. So what are the default logins? SA and Windows account, which is adding the current user, NT authority, that is related, network services, and the one more is like network authority by default, and network services that is related to the database engine what we are selecting, and SQL Server agent. These are default logins. By default it will come, and if they want to explain what is the purpose of those, we have to explain. These are default logins. So here don't confuse. I gave extra point like these things. Why? Because sometimes what will happen, the people will ask, can we change the service account? Service accounts means that particular SQL server running, which has a login as which account it is running. Here, if you go here, properties, they will ask, I need to be run into the different account, not for this account. So the service accounts are always recommended is from the domain accounts. The domain accounts are created from the Windows level. So the Windows level, Windows team will create. So we need to ask to provide that particular domain account. So they will give the username and they will give the password. So we have to give the user name. So here, before the slash, this is the domain name, this is the username. Okay, they will provide, and they will provide the password as well. So the recommendation is like the service account. The service account and password, we can ask them to set to non-expired. So some secure projects, what they will do, every 1 year, every 2 years, they will ask, they will put the account expire and password expire. So expirations are two things. One is account expiration, and other thing is like password expiration. So the service account, always we will ask to set the non-expire, and as well as the service account will have full control. Generally, we will ask the service account should have access, read and write access. So we need, generally the Windows team knows, if you ask to create the account, the create account means if the person join the company, so what they will do, they will create the account. That means they will create the username and password. So that is the reason every 1 month, every 3 months, our username and password will expire. So if you ask the service account, what they will do, they will create the same kind of username and password, but they will set the password is non-expired and account expired is like a non-expired, and also they will provide read and write access in the active directory. That is called like a service account. So all accounts, not a service accounts. The service accounts are a special kind of permissions that accounts created in the active directory, and they will provide the read and write access. So these are like a let me stop recording here, and we can discuss again from here. Authentication, authorization, and default logins and logins. Once we get the quick review, I can take for 2 minutes break, and again I will start recording for another topic, so that whenever you're watching the video, you can understand topic by topic.
Sure, sir.